Hello, and welcome back to StoryTime with Eric Zimmer. I know it's been a while, but, I've been busy. Anyways, we still have 2 more chapters left in Sagamore Hill, Theodore Roosevelt's Summer White House by Bill Bleyer. Where we last left off, we read about Edith Roosevelt on her own, and how her death ended the family's time at Sagamore Hill, but it opened the door for the public to experience its wonders. Now we're going to learn what happened to Sagamore Hill after Edith Roosevelt died, which I think you all know what happened. So you ready? Alright, let's begin. Chapter 7. Theodore Roosevelt Association Saves Sagamore Hill. The idea of transforming Sagamore Hill into a shrine and museum was suggested only days after Theodore Roosevelt's death in 1919. A Brooklyn Daily Beagle editorial on January 12th asserted there can be no other memorial to him than his own home. There he lived for many years with his family and trophies around him. Here he played, thought, and planned. It described Sagamore Hill as redolent of Roosevelt, with every object and every room telling something about the vibrant personality of the man. Very accurate description. A Sagamore Hill museum was also on the minds of TR's friends who assembled in New York City as the Roosevelt Permanent Memorial National Committee in March of 1919. The group believed the Cove Neck property should be preserved like Mount Vernon and Mr. Abraham Lincoln's home in Springfield, Illinois. That became one of the objectives of the Roosevelt Memorial Association when it was incorporated by Congress on May 31st, 1920. A Women's Roosevelt Memorial Association was created earlier with the goal of rebuilding TR's demolished birthplace in Manhattan. In an undated advertisement, the RMA outlined its purpose in preserving the site. Sagamore Hill is more than the historic home of a great president. It is a symbol of Theodore Roosevelt's conception of the good life for the individual and the nation, expressed there in the daily living of an American family, and his own continuous challenge to all that was best in the American character. When the association approached Edith Roosevelt, she rebuffed the group because its vision for the house conflicted with hers, as her home for the rest of her life, and then the residence of Ted and his family. From what I've heard, it seemed like Ted III was going to inherit the house, like all next of kin do. And if that happened, his great-grandson, Theodore Roosevelt VI, would probably still be there. Probably. I don't know. While telling the RMA she appreciated his interest, Mrs. Roosevelt said having the house continue to be occupied by the family would make it more vitally a part of American public life than it would as a place of public pilgrimage. The association moved on to other projects. The RMA controlled nearly $2 million in public donations from a National Roosevelt Week fundraising campaign in October of 1919. So it spent the next 2 decades acquiring and dedicating a 43-acre memorial park along the southern shore of Oyster Bay, purchasing a 90-acre island in the Potomac River, presented to the nation as a wildlife sanctuary to be known as Theodore Roosevelt Island, and accumulating TR's letters and other papers that were donated to Harvard College and the Library of Congress. Despite Edith Roosevelt's insistence on keeping the house, serious discussions resumed with family members even before her death in the fall of 1948. The completion of Old Orchard in 1938 made it unlikely that Ted and his wife Eleanor would ever live in the old Queen Anne house. Basically, Ted III was supposed to get the house, but Eleanor wanted a more modern house, so they got Old Orchard, the Georgian-style house, which is on 4 acres of land near the apple orchard on Sagamore Hill. Anyways, the RMA trustees resurrected the subject of a purchase at a meeting in 1940. The board and its consultants worried that without a sale to the association, the property would be subdivided for building lots. But they were told that while Edith Roosevelt expressed great interest in the idea, she still felt the time was not right. Late in 1947, the RMA received word that the time was right. The executor of TR's estate told the board that the family wanted a sale to be consummated during Edith's lifetime to avoid the complications of dealing with 11 heirs after her death. On March 16, 1948, the executive committee agreed to offer $75,000 for the house, its contents, and the property, with Mrs. Roosevelt given a life tenancy. In May of 1948, based on 2 appraisals, the RMA had reached agreement with the family to buy the house and property for $104,000, with the price for the contents to be determined later. But wrangling over the terms prevented the sale from being concluded before Edith Roosevelt died on September 30th, 1948. Finally, on April 19th, 1949, the Association Board approved signing a contract with the estate. The document executed on May 11th, 1949 stipulated the price of $104,000 for the house and property, with the RMA additionally paying the value of furniture, works of art, and miscellaneous personal property, determined in an appraisal by Park Burnett Galleries Incorporated the previous fall to be $17,301. The most valuable possession was an 18-karat gold presentation cup inscribed San Francisco greets President Roosevelt, San Francisco, California, May 12th, 1903, which was valued at $1,500. In the North Room, the Bronco Buster, signed by Frederick Remington and inscribed Colonel Theodore Roosevelt from his regiment at Camp Wyckoff, September 15, 1898, was appraised at $700. A pair of tusks from an elephant shot by TR in Uganda in 1909 was calculated at $400. On February 10, 1950, the RMA paid $20,220 for all the items in the Park Burnett appraisal except for those kept by members of the family. The New York Herald Tribune reported that the RMA expected to spend $500,000 to $750,000 to prepare the house for visitors in about a year. The article quoted Ethel Roosevelt Derby, T.R. and Edith's younger daughter, and a member of the RMA board. I am pleased not merely for sentimental reasons, but because it can serve as a useful purpose for inculcating and disseminating Americanism. There are too few such places in our country, and we should do all we can to preserve those we have. TR's great-grandson, Theodore Roosevelt IV, who is still living, but is technically Theodore Roosevelt IV, technically Theodore Roosevelt V, praises Ethel as the unsung hero of the Sagamore Hill story. As the family was preparing to sell the property, she was the one who mobilized the association to make the purchase. More importantly, she laid down the law to the family. There will be no looting by children or grandchildren of the contents of this house. And that ensured that the house would become a museum with most of its original contents in place. Ending the protracted process of buying Sagamore Hill did not end the RMA's travails. The association needed the village of Cove Neck to change its zoning to allow the house to be open for the public. That proved to be a major obstacle. Cove Neck's unwillingness to amend its code delayed the transfer of the title until 1950. Village officials and residents were concerned about altering the entirely residential character of the community, and also felt the private 2-lane road leading to the property was too narrow to handle the expected traffic. Nonetheless, in June of 1949, the Roosevelt Estate and Association petitioned for a change of zone. The proposal drew praise from local and New York City newspapers. The establishment of a national shrine in our community would be a great source of pride to everyone residing in this area. commented the Oyster Bay Guardian. The Herald Tribune stated that a Sagamore Hill museum would allow visitors to catch a glimpse of something profoundly important to their nation's life. Village residents remained unconvinced. At a hearing in July, all but 2 speakers opposed the change. They cited the narrowness of Cove Neck Road, the loss of tax revenue if the property were owned by a non-profit group, fears that visitors to Sagamore Hill would trespass on neighboring estates, and the concern that the rezoning could set a precedent. The residents who spoke in opposition included 2 of TR's cousins, John K. Roosevelt and George Emlyn Roosevelt. The village board also denied the zone change. Ignoring the local concerns, officials of the town of Oyster Bay in Nassau County worked to circumvent the village by looking for money to pay for a new access road. The RMA continued discussions with Cove Neck officials, offering to sell all but 25 acres around the house to reduce the tax impact, as well as closing the existing entrance to the property. Meanwhile, the association worked with county officials and state legislators to pass a state law to allow Sagamore Hill to become a memorial without regard to local zoning. Bills were introduced in Albany on February 6, 1951, to amend the state's village law permitting maintenance of residences of deceased presidents as memorials by nonprofit organizations. The legislation passed was signed by Governor Thomas E. Dewey and took effect on March 19th. The RMA consulted with an informal committee of National Park Service officials who visited the property and made suggestions on the access road and other issues. These included restoring the kitchen, pantry, and gunroom for inclusion in the tour, which was done. The missing rail on the porch, removed to facilitate campaign talk, should not be replaced because its absence is of unique interest, the committee advised. The association agreed initially, but later changed its mind. The Park Service professionals were unheeded in their urging of the desirability of preserving existing cultural features as nearly intact as possible, including the historic entrance road, vegetable and flower gardens, stables, and other elements of the grounds. The RMA seized the farming operations, and the cow shed and chicken coop were removed in 1954 when a 150-car parking lot was constructed on top of the gardens and pastures. The National Park Service, more than half a century later, would recommend